Good evening and welcome to our Finger Lakes Wine Virtual Tasting Series. This evening we're going to be tasting Vinifera red wines from the Finger Lakes. And we have with us some great wines, great panelists this evening. I'm just going to go through in our first flight. I'll explain, we're going to go through each wine and we'll have folks be able to send in questions to us via Twitter. In our first panel this evening from Silver Thread Vineyard, we have Shannon Brock. She's the owner. And Shannon we'll get back right with her in a moment after we introduce all these other gentlemen. From Swedish Hill Winery, we have Dave Peterson, owner. And from Heron Hill Winery, we have the winemaker Bernard Canuck. And from Damiani Wine Cellars, we have one of the owners, Glenn Allen. And with that, we're going to move over to Shannon. And Shannon, I'd like it if you could tell us a little bit about your Blackbird Red 2011, how that wine was made, and tell us a little bit about Silver Thread.
Sure. Well, Blackbird is a Meritage style blend or a Bordeaux blend. It is 70% Cabernet Franc, 15% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 15% Merlot. And this wine is a blend of our estate-grown fruit from Silver Thread and also some purchased grapes from two other vineyards in the Finger Lakes that we work very closely with. This wine, you might have heard that 2011 was a challenging harvest in the Finger Lakes. It rained 70% of the days during September and October, which is never a good thing during harvest, but we were very, very satisfied with the quality of these grapes. A lot of that had to do with the vineyard, with our own vineyard and the other vineyards we sourced from. We didn't feel in any way that the quality of the grapes were compromised. We didn't feel that they were underripe in any way. And these were, the three varieties were harvested separately, fermented separately, and aged separately. This wine was aged in barrel, but we used neutral oak barrels. So the average age of the barrels used was 6 years old. And I think that comes through pretty obviously. You can't smell any, there's not a lot of noticeable oak to this wine. And that's a stylistic decision on our part at Silver Thread. It was part of the house style of Silver Thread wines going back to the first vintage in 1991. And it's something that my husband Paul and I have chose to continue since we took over Silver Thread. So we're really trying to express the terroir of the Finger Lakes through this wine and the delicate fruit that we grow here.
Could you tell us a little bit about the specific terroir of your vineyard, Shannon?
Sure.
We actually had a question about the terroir of your vineyard. So
sure, great. I'd be happy to. The biggest reason that we chose to purchase Silver Thread a couple of years ago is because of its unique vineyard location and the fact that the vineyard was so well established. The first grapes were planted in 1981 on the east side of Seneca Lake. And our vineyard is probably about maybe 300 yards above the lake shore. The soil as you get down that close to the lake is very shallow. We have about 18 inches of topsoil over shale. So where the Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon grapes in this wine come from that site, and the vines have to dig down into that shale. So we get a lot of the vines are definitely struggling at that site because of the shallowness of the soil, but also we get very good ripeness, as I was saying earlier, because those the vineyard is down so close to the lake, and it's a really warm site in the times when we need it to be warm, and it's cool in the times when it could be too hot at other locations. So the lake provides a really nice moderating influence for us at that location.
Shannon, if I put you on the spot, what's your ideal red wine grape for the Finger Lakes?
I wouldn't just pick one grape. We actually feel that these three grapes together, these main Bordeaux varieties, the Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot, are the best red wine that we can make in the Finger Lakes. There are some, in Bordeaux, France, these wines are traditionally blended because each grape on its own has some pluses and minuses. So by blending, we can get some of the nicest overall, qualities in the finished wine.
Very good. I think we're going to take this opportunity to go on to our second wine of this evening. And Dave Peterson brought with him this evening a 2007 Optimus. And Dave's family has owned Swedish Hill for a long while. He's on the same lake that I am. I've known him since he was involved in grape extension in the Finger Lakes, and they do a great job at Swedish Hill, win tons of awards, make some great wines. Dave, could you tell us a little bit about the 2007 Optimus?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Optimus is a long-term project of ours and was actually probably the original foray for us into Vinifera Reds in the Finger Lakes. If we go back into the 80s and even into the early 90s, Vinifera Reds were pretty new at that time. So our original, what we called Optimus Vineyard, was a planting of Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc that was actually equally divided between the three varieties. Our intention was never to make varietals from those varieties, or at least at that point it was to make a Meritage or a Bordeaux blend. I think the term Meritage was actually quite new at that time. So we started out with that, and probably we're not sure who had the first Meritage in the Finger Lakes. I think we were one of the early ones. I know there were a couple of other producers, Faxeron and Nep were some of the early ones too. But our 91 vintage was the first vintage of that. So maybe it's appropriate that this is the oldest wine in the group since we've been doing it a while. The Optimus has kind of evolved over time. And each year we look at Optimus differently in terms of what varieties are the lead varieties. It's always Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot, but the lead player each year changes accordingly. So we also make varietals from these within our Swedish Hill Wine and our sister wineries, Goosewatch and Penguin Bay. But Optimus is sort of gets its first choice, I'd say, as far as what goes into it. We also tend to ramp up production a bit more in a year where we think it's a really good red wine year, and not make it at all, or at least make less in a year where we might not think it's quite as strong. On the other hand, some of the years have surprised us in the past that maybe we didn't think as much potential was there early on, and some of these wines evolved nicely. This particular wine is an 07 that is based on Cabernet Sauvignon with 40-something percent and 30-something percent Merlot, and 25%, I believe, Cabernet Franc. Now, some years Cabernet Franc is the lead player. I don't think Merlot has ever been the lead, but I think more often than not, probably 2/3 of the time, Cab Sauv has been the one that has sort of gravitated the highest percentage. But they're never varietal. Generally not more than 50 or 55% of the lead variety anyway. So this wine, as compared to Shannon's wine, probably a bit more oak, certainly noticeable there. This wine sees over a year in barrel. The barrels, there's a range of types from American to Hungarian to French, and there's a range of ages. So it's just a matter of selecting barrel lots. The vineyards tend to be made separately, and then we make our selections on the final winemaking later.
Dave, the 2007 vintage, if folks aren't really familiar with it in the Finger Lakes, that was a great growing year in the Finger Lakes, correct? I think as they look at the glass, that for a Finger Lakes red, that's got some beautiful color to it. I think that was really a spectacular year, wasn't it?
I think it was a great red wine year, and it was one of those years where we anticipated that it would be great going in. But I guess I sort of I mean, sometimes we hear that comment for a Finger Lakes red, and I think we've seen an evolution in Finger Lakes reds that's been a tremendous change over the last 5 to 10 years, and I think the old time thing where we have a really bad year, I think the bottom has been lifted. What we can do with reds, even in a more difficult year. I think Shannon's wine is a great example of, even though it got wet at harvest, there's some beautiful flavors in that wine, and the evolution and the difference between the really poor, so-called poor years and great years, I think have come much closer together. But you're right, 7 was it was a relatively easy wine to make in my mind.
Dave, could you tell me what the retail price on that wine is?
That the Optimist sells for 25.
25. And if I could go backwards 1 second, Shannon, the retail price on the Blackbird.
It's 22.
And I had one question for Shannon before we move on. One of our media members had asked about your 2010 Blackbird versus 2011.
Mhm.
If you would comment on the differences between the wines.
Well, 2010 was the 2010 vintage was a transitional year at Silver Thread. My husband and I took over the winery partway through 2011. So the 2010 wines were made by Richard Fiegel, the previous owner, and then finished and bottled by us. So that the 2010 Blackbird was a different blend as well. It was 75% Cabernet Franc, 25% Cabernet Sauvignon. It didn't have the Merlot component.
Okay.
But the grapes, other than the Merlot, which we sourced from a different vineyard that the previous owner had never worked with before, the grapes that were used in the 2010 Blackbird are also in the 2011.
Okay. I think that probably answers the question. Dave, I had one other question for you before we move on. Do you see more potential for red wines in our region?
I think we're in arguably the infancy and the start of something I think really special in terms of red wines, and we haven't even Riesling. If we look back at the history of Riesling and how much that evolved in the early years, and with red wines we're even at a younger stage. So the viticulture has improved so dramatically, and I think that's one of the biggest things that's really resulted in huge improvements in the wines. Different varieties on different sites, and not everybody's going to have the same experiences, which are the same varieties, or the best varieties for each site. I think I neglected to point out that our wine was also included a significant portion of Sawmill Creek grapes on Seneca Lake, and that's become known as a really good producer.
Pretty well-known vineyard.
Of top red wine grapes, particularly in the area.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, Dave. We're going to move on now to Heron Hill Winery's winemaker, Bernard Canuck. Bernard has been helping out with Heron Hill for a few years now, and has a vast experience before he came there. And Heron Hill has been one of the leaders in the Finger Lakes for a number of years, has a gorgeous setting looking at over Keuka Lake. And Bernard, could you tell us a little bit about that 2010 Cab Franc, how it was made, and a little bit about that wine?
Sure. This is grapes from Ingle Vineyard. So John Ingle, the owner of Heron Hill, has his own vineyard on the Canandaigua Lake in South Bristol. And he's been growing grapes there since 1972. So we're starting to have like very, some old vines there, a very interesting vineyard. And we traditionally keep the wine separated. For our classic line, we blend grapes and wines from all the Finger Lakes, Keuka, Seneca, even Cayuga Lake. But for John's grape, we make a point of just keeping them separated. And this Cabernet Franc actually has some Merlot in it, just because that is the way the vineyard was planted. So, and it was like 30 years ago, something like that. And which is pretty interesting because we never separated the grapes, so they all ferment together. It's maybe 10% Merlot and maybe 5% Cabernet Sauvignon interplanted.
Little field blend.
Yes, according to John, it's just the way the vines came in. He ordered Cabernet Franc, but I guess back then it was, which actually for me it's very interesting because traditionally in France we used to blend different grapes as early as Crush, mainly in the Languedoc, southern France, blending Carignan and Grenache as grapes and putting them in the tank. The idea was that the earlier you blend the grapes, the more harmonized they will be. So that's that's the idea. And actually, I think it's pretty neat to do that in this wine. Then it's fermented for about maceration, depending on the vintage. For the 2010, I want to say we did about 5 weeks skin maceration, post-fermentation maceration. Just because the vintage was great, 2010 was a very solid vintage for the reds. So actually, for anything, I was happy in 2010. And then it was aged for about 40 months in French, Hungarian, and American oak. Like Dave said, it's nice to have a nice variety. It just gives complexity to the wine.
Did you know the price of the retail price of that, Bernard?
I want to say 25.
25.
24.
I'm sure someone's going to ask me if I don't ask.
Yes, it's a 25.
And I wanted to ask you also about if you had to pick your favorite Finger Lakes red grape to work with, what you enjoy working with the best in the cellar.
Well, I like Cabernet Franc. I also like Blanc Frankish. For us, it has a nice spice. Another one which is trickier though is Pinot Noir.
Yep.
For me, it really depends on the sites. I like Mcgregor Vineyards has some Pinot Noir as well. Starting to get a little, all fine sites, very interesting to play with that. And for Pinot Noir, I think it comes down to the lot or the vineyard selection itself to find a nice spot. You have such diversity in the Finger Lakes that I'm pretty sure there is like a little block somewhere that will do very nice, and then another one that's going to be just wrong. Just a matter of trying it, unfortunately. That's how the vineyards got, different in Europe. It's just trial and error. Just took centuries to get there.
So we've got a few years to go till we have it all figured out here.
Yeah, but I think that the learning curve is much quicker now.
Definitely.
Than it used to be.
I'm going to put you on the spot with a question from our media. If you had to compare the Finger Lakes wine region to another region that had a climate similar to ours, could you come up with an example that you thought might be pertinent for us?
I mean, for me, the Finger Lakes is very unique. We have our own situations, our own weather conditions and such. If I had to compare it to a region, for me it would be somewhere between Loire Valley and Alsace. More for a cooler climate like Alsace, but you have this body of water helping. That would be the Loire Valley from the other Rhine influence to protect the grapes. But Alsace can have pretty rough winters. So that's why we put it in between the two somewhere.
Very good. Well, I think at this point we're going to thank you, Bernard, and we're going to move on to our last panelists in this first flight. And from Damiani Wine Cellars, we have Glenn Allen, one of the owners at Damiani. And Damiani was started in 2004, and we have a lot of wineries here this evening that have been around for a long time. For me, 2004, Damiani is relatively new, but they've created all kinds of buzz for themselves in the time they've been in the Finger Lakes, have had some great wines, great press, and have done a great job. So I'm going to let Glenn tell the rest of the story about the 2010 Cabernet Franc Reserve.
Well, thanks. A lot of that fame comes from my two partners, Lou Damiani and Phil Davis. This 2010 Cab Franc comes from Lou's own vineyard. There's only about an acre of this. It's planted on very deep soils. It's called a Howard gravelly silt loam. There's only a few stretches of that type of soil here on the east side of Seneca, which is where our vineyards are located. And indeed, that just speaks to the region as a whole. We have extremely diverse soil types here in the Finger Lakes, and one of the things Lou and Phil have pursued is to express the wines through those unique terroirs. Phil has his own vineyard, and we also source from our neighbors at Sawmill Creek and a few others along the east side of Seneca, a little bit from Cayuga and Cayuga lakes as well. Each provides a unique flavor profile. The 2010 Cab Franc from Lou's vineyard was quite extraordinary. We knew from the beginning, and it's part of our limited production reserve and single vineyard series wines. We only make these in certain years when it's obvious from the beginning that there's something special. It's unique when it comes in, and it is significantly different from the other lots. One of our philosophies in making red wine, and it's carried out with this, is relatively light oak treatment. We like to let the fruit express itself, and then just marry a little bit of oak to frame it. This only saw about 3 months of new oak, partial French, partial American, before moved into neutral aged barrels. And
Did you have the retail price on that one, Glenn?
this is $41.99.
$41.99. Very good. And I'll kind of ask you also if Damiani, I know you guys do a few different Vinifera Reds, if the crew feels that one variety is the best currently in the Finger Lakes, or they like working with in the cellar the best?
Well, this is a nice lineup we have here. We also make a Meritage, so indeed the Cab Franc, Merlot, and Cab Sauv in our program are largely geared towards making that finest blend in the red world, Meritage Bordeaux blend. In exceptional years, we'll bottle separately reserves and single vineyards, and we also make some varietals. But another one of our great passions is Pinot Noir, and I think the Pinot Noir for this region has great promise. In particular because Pinot is one of those grapes that truly expresses the difference in terroir. In 2010, we made 3 different Pinot Noirs, each from a different vineyard, each dramatically different.
Well, one of the questions we had, if I looked at your notes right, someone asked the production of this wine that they're trying tonight, was it around 100 cases?
Yeah, 140 cases.
Okay.
That's the most we've ever made of this particular wine.
Very good.
Typically a must.
Very good. Well, I would like to thank our first 4 panelists this evening, and you guys brought some great wines and did a great job, and thank you very much. Those of you who are following us this evening, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break so that we can reset our next panel. And thanks again, folks, for coming in this evening with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, folks. We're going to start our second flight of the evening. I'm going to take a moment. First off, I neglected to introduce one person at the first flight. That's myself. I'm Jeff Hauk, winemaker at Lucas Vineyards, and I'm our moderator this evening. And that's enough about that. We're going to move on to our second group of panelists. From Rooster Hill, we have winemaker Barry Tortolone. And then from Atwater Vineyards, we have Chris Mathewson. From the Hector Wine Company, we have Alexandra Donecker. And from Mcgregor Vineyards, we have John Mcgregor. And I'm going to take each one of these folks and have them tell us about their wine this evening, and then ask them some questions. First off, we have Barry. Let's talk about Rooster Hill's 2010 Limburger, Barry.
Okay, it's a state grown. We have 2 blocks, and it totals up to be about 1.2 acres. So most years I have between 6 and 8 barrels of Limburger to work with. So another moniker for it is Blaufränkisch, but we still label it as Limburger. I do the standard red wine making practices on it. It sits on the skins for 12 to 14 days till it goes to ferments to dryness. I use GRE and D254 yeast, and then it gets 20 months in French oak, and we bottle it a couple seasons after the initial harvest. So that's what we do for the winemaking on this wine.
What was the retail price of that, Barry?
This is $24.99.
Thank you. Anything special about the background of the fruit you were working with that year?
2010 was honestly a great year in the Finger Lakes. But the nice thing about Lemberger is, from a viticultural standpoint, the clusters are loose. It hangs well. So if you do need a little bit more time in the fall, because it might be a little bit cooler and damp, they'll hang pretty well. And 2010 was one of the highest bricks, lowest acidity years we've had with this variety since we brought it on board in 2005. That was our first harvest.
One of the media members had asked about target bricks, average bricks that we might get at harvest. Would you like to field that?
The Limburger is a little bit different. We usually go more on flavor, but we have been averaging anywhere from 21.5 to 23.5 with this variety. You can really see the difference in the seeds and the skins just by chewing them, going into the vineyard every day and biting down on the seeds. You can really tell when it's time to pick and when they're not ready, because there's nothing worse than biting into an unripe seed. But when they get, when it's time to bring them off, the seeds have a real nice nutty flavor, and then the skins and the tannins, they just kind of round out in your mouth. It's actually not a bad experience. Up until that point, you can tell the difference.
So a lot of people are familiar. Cab Franc is probably the highest profile red in the Finger Lakes. What other red grapes do you see as up-and-comers in our region?
Well, at least at Rooster Hill right now, we have the big four, I guess: Cab Soft, Cab Franc, Lemberger, and Pinot. What really does well for us is we have an estate Cab Franc, and we blend it with Lemberger in the 70 to 30% ratio, and that ends up being our biggest seller in the tasting room. So, I'm an advocate for at least those four varieties.
And your favorite of all those varieties?
On site, I really like our Cab Franc. I went to a seminar a number of years ago, and they thought that might be the red grape for the Finger Lakes, but they were taking the wrong approach. They were wanting to be an $1,100 ton workhorse. But what we found over the years, viticulturally, you really have to be on top of it because of how vigorous the vines are, and the canopy management, and then the amount of fruit you leave on the vine. We're on a kind of a steep learning curve, but I think we're getting it dialed in pretty well. We've been pretty excited since 2007 with the kind of quality deals that we've gotten off, at least our estate grapes, for both varieties, actually.
Barry's being modest. Rooster Hill makes some great wines, and this one you're trying tonight's real nice, and they do a great job with all their wines. I think with that, we're going to move on to our next panelist this evening, and we have from Atwater Vineyards, Chris Mathewson. Atwater, another great winery located on the east side of Seneca Lake. They have a gorgeous view. They have some wonderful wines. Chris works with Vinny Alaperte in the winery, and he's going to talk a little bit about his 2010 Pinot Noir tonight. How about first off, I've got to keep asking everyone, Chris, can you just start right off with the retail price on that?
You know, we haven't released the wine yet. I believe the retail is going to be right around $20.
Okay.
You know, $2 less, $2.
Close enough.
Yeah. So we're releasing it in like 2 weeks. So the wine was picked on September 10th. Everything was hand picked. And at that point, we take everything and we took a little bit of it. We have about 3 acres that we have there, and we took a little bit, and half of it goes, or about a quarter of it goes into fermentive eggs, which if no one's familiar with these are like, it's kind of like, it kind of percolates, so it kind of like the warmth from the fermentation goes over the top and kind of punches down the bin itself, actually. And then the rest is fermented in bins. We're doing about 3 punch downs a day. The inoculation is done with RA17 and AMH. Our clones that we use, we have mostly Dijon clones, but we also have a clone 18, which is a Beaujolais clone that we use as well. Then everything goes into French oak for about 9 months to 12 months, depending on when we're going to be bottling that year, and then it's basically all set there.
2010 again for you guys. It was not a typical Finger Lakes year.
No.
It was really a nice year, right?
Yeah, I think 2010. Maybe I'm crazy, but I kind of believe in global warming a little bit. And for the Finger Lakes, I think if you look at 2007, 2005, 2010, 2012. They're really kind of similar years in the warmth that we're getting. So in 2010, we picked it at 21.5 bricks. And part of our goal is to keep the wines so that we are maintaining a little, the Pinot Noir, that we're maintaining a little bit of acidity and that we're controlling the alcohols as well. So we have a lower alcohol wine with a little bit of acid there still, so it can be paired with food. It's not going to overwhelm food. It's not going to overwhelm itself also. We're going to try to keep it in balance, basically.
Another one of our media members had asked Chris about vintage to vintage variation. Not about any wine in particular, but just in general in the Finger Lakes.
Yeah, there's a huge, not a huge, let's not say huge, there's a definite vintage variation in the Finger Lakes. And for me, I just kind of embrace that. I mean, each year is something different that we're going to work with, and it gives us, we can make one type of, we can have a consistency to our region and to the vintage, but we can also vary with the vintage as well, with how the weather is that year, basically.
And for Atwater in the cellar, what do you guys feel is your favorite variety to work with as far as the red?
I think if you ask me, I'm going to say Pinot Noir and maybe Blaufränkisch at Atwater. If you ask Vinny, he's going to say Syrah, and probably I would say Blaufränkisch as well.
Yeah.
So definitely Blaufränkisch, and then we gotta go the other.
So for Atwater, you guys use the Blaufränkisch label, that name for.
Yeah, we do.
And for those folks who are familiar, Blaufränkisch is also.
Blaufränkisch is also. It's a ton of names, but Blaufränkisch is Lemberger also. Yeah. That's mostly known, but it's also Keckfränkisch. We chose Blaufränkisch because. Personally, I feel the region's very similar to Austria in Blaufränkisch, and the Blaufränkisch we produce in the Finger Lakes, I feel, is similar to Austrian Blaufränkisch. So I thought that was a good way for us to go with Blaufränkisch there.
Let's see if we have any other. If any of you are following our feed this evening and have questions for any of these winemakers, we have. A little extra time, so feel free to ask. We be happy to answer any of your questions. At this point in time, we're going to go ahead on to our next panelist, and we have with us this evening Alexandra Donecker. She is from Hector Wine Company. Hector Wine Company is one of the newer wineries in the Finger Lakes, but don't let the newness fool you. Their vineyards source a lot of grapes from Sawmill Creek Vineyard, which is directly across the street, who are some of the most well-known grape growers in the region. And they have some great fruit to work with and have gotten, again, another fairly new winery that's getting a ton of great buzz for their wines. And we're real pleased to have Alexandra here. She's going to tell us a little bit about the 2011 Essence.
So the 2011 Essence is made up of 40% Syrah, 40% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 20% Merlot. We handpick and then hand sort all of the grapes, and they are all sourced from Sawmill Creek, which is across the street, right on the east side of Seneca Lake. After we finish hand sorting, we ferment our Merlot and our Cab Sauv in open top fermenters using D254 and FX10. And then the Syrah we have in large oak fermenters, and we allowed that to ferment indigenously. So it adds a really interesting character to the wine. And that retails for $25.
Thank you.
Oh, and then we keep them in oak for about 10 months before we bottle.
And 2011, would you like to talk at all, Alexandra, about the, we had some of our panelists this evening say it was challenging, the 2011 vintage for grapes because of excessive moisture and stuff, how you guys dealt with that in the winery?
I actually wasn't at Hector Wine Company in the 2011 harvest. I was at a different winery, but yeah, we had a lot of rain. But you know, as long as our vineyards stayed up with their spray technique and vineyard practices and management, and we were out in the vineyard making sure, you know, paying attention to when we had to pick.
And it sounded like it's kind of standard practice doing some hand sorting.
Yeah, we keep increasing the amount of hand sorting that we do at Hector Wine Company.
I just had a question, and I'll kind of throw it out to the panel. It was, what is the percent vine loss with an average winter? Kind of a tough question when you say, because we don't necessarily look in a normal winter at vine loss. It's more like bud damage.
Yeah.
In a normal winter, you're not going to see much for vine loss. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Oh, completely. It'd be really sad if we had normal vine loss. I don't think anybody would be here if we had normal vine
I don't know
loss.
if the folks online are familiar with it, but in the Finger Lakes, a popular practice is where we hill up the graft union, and that's where the rootstock and the varietal have a graft union at the base of the soil, and a pile of dirt is piled over that, and that protects the vine. And if we have a extreme cold event, and by extreme cold for us, that would be below 10, below 0, then we could see a lot of damage on the top part of the vine, but the actual vine will usually survive and shoot up a new trunk. So I'll answer that one because it seemed like an easy one. So, but Alexandra, I had a couple of questions specifically for you. One is a marketing question. Do you think these wines like we've had this evening, do you find it easier or more difficult to sell these wines to consumers?
I think it's getting easier. Consumers are definitely opening up to the fact that there are really high quality red wines being made in the Finger Lakes, and that the retail prices might be a little bit higher than what they've been used to paying. But I think that a lot of that owes to the Finger Lakes tasting room model that we have, where we're able to educate our consumers when they come in and taste our wines. And a lot of the time it's us behind the bar too. At Hector Wine Company, we're really small, so most of the time you'll see myself and the two owners pouring wine behind the bar, and so we can really talk to our consumers, and
That's awesome.
that makes it easier.
Another question, it's probably kind of directed at you, Alexandra, because someone asked about how much Syrah was planted in the Finger Lakes, and we kind of talked a little bit beforehand about that. I'm not really sure.
I don't know the exact number, but there was a really interesting article in the New York Work Report maybe about a month or two ago. I think it was called the Strange Story of Syrah in the Finger Lakes, and it was a great article. It really touched upon how Syrah up here can be a wonderful thing because it's in a cool climate. So you get those subtle white pepper notes on a good year, and then on a year like 2011, you still get a lot of that pepper, but it's actually more so. And there's, as much as it's difficult to grow, so are some of the other reds that we're
Definitely.
doing.
I almost would say it's probably under 20 acres, the Syrah in the Finger Lakes.
I think you could count the producers on your.
Yeah,
like
I
one
mean, we
hand.
could probably wouldn't need more than
Maybe one finger.
Yeah, there aren't that many. All right, I think I had one more. All right, well, I think we're going to move on to our last panelist tonight. Thank you very much, Alexandra. And we have with us one of the old-timers of the Finger Lakes wine industry. We have John Mcgregor. Sorry, John. John's with Mcgregor Vineyards. Mcgregor does another vineyard does a great job. The vineyard was established in 1971, and they have, as far as Finger Lakes, they have a lot of older plantings, and they have some pretty neat stuff. And John is going to tell you a little bit about their 2008 Black Russian Red. Personal story, that's a wine that I've loved for many years. I shared it with my wife one time for a special occasion, and I think it's a really cool wine, and I'm looking forward to what John has to say about it.
Thank you. I guess with the old comment, it goes to say I'm probably one of the oldest novices here. So we're all novices in the Finger Lakes when it comes to growing specifically vinifera grapes. This is still a pretty long experiment in process. And this wine, our 2008 Black Russian Red, and to answer your question right off the bat, price-wise, is a $54 bottle of wine. It's a blend of two of the more oddball vinifera grapes grown in the region, Separavi and Sorexia charni, Eastern European grape varieties of quite ancient origin to winemaking. Something that we stumbled upon haphazardly, 1979, 1980. And after quite a few years of playing with those varietals on their own through the mid to late 80s, starting in the 90s, we came up with this blend and have been running with it ever since. It speaks for itself. It's got unique flavors. It's rather seductive in a powerful way, and is a good representative of what the Finger Lakes can do, I think.
Definitely would agree with you. And what led your family to plant those varieties, John?
I think if you go back to the 70s when a lot of this was going on for my family, and playing around with vinifera grapes in this region, we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't know what would work. We didn't know what spray programs definitely to use. We didn't know what kind of pruning practices to do. So all of these things were trial and error. See what happens, work through one year over another. So we certainly started with your more traditional varietals, Pinot Noir being a personal favorite, a family favorite, something that I think is very promising for our region, along with Cabernet Sauvignon, much later on Cabernet Franc, but it really was a matter of just trying to find noble grapes, vinifera grape varieties that could withstand our difficult climate. And it's not just the cold winters that we have to worry about, it's very high humidity atmospheric conditions that coupled with the two, if you don't have healthy vines going into a winter, you're really in trouble in this area.
Definitely. One of the questions, and I'll let you take it if you want, John, or you can pass it on to one of your panelists here. We had, how much research has been done to identify red grape varieties that would be appropriate for the Finger Lakes region? And is the use of better known varietals based more on marketing potential or on appropriateness of the variety to the region? Does anybody want to tackle that one?
That's tough.
I mean, I think Cornell University we have a great resource in the Finger Lakes. They have a great extension program, and they have done tons of research on varietals, and they also do a ton of research on spray programs, on new materials that are out there. So they're a great resource for us in the area, but I'm going to let somebody else tackle the one on whether or not the better known varietals, if we're using those based on marketing potential or on them being an appropriate variety.
Well, I think one thing I'd like to back up with first is specifically wine and winemaking, and those involved in grape growing are coming from it from a passion standpoint. And when we find in a young region such as this an oddball grape variety, not so much from the case of our story with the Russian varietals, but something like Blaufränkisch or Lemberger or Syrah, that comes from the passion of the grape grower and or the winemaker. It's something they have an intimate desire to see if it's going to work, if they can create one of their own. And so I think it
So
comes
most
more
of the
from
people, I don't think, and I have to agree with you, they're not doing it on marketing potential. They're doing it because the owner or winemaker believes in that varietal, and
Absolutely.
they believe that they can ripen the fruit and make good quality wines from it.
that would be my opinion.
So if it wasn't for Cornell, we wouldn't have the kind of interest that we have in Limburger today.
Definitely not.
It was Thomas Hennig playing Bob Poole.
Who were some of the greatest resources. Some of the younger crowd probably isn't familiar with that, but they were a huge resource for us in this region. We had another question that had just come in about if any of you guys would like to talk about microclimates in the Finger Lakes. We know that we have them, so.
I would love to. Currently, the Finger Lakes is one huge. There's 3 AVAs in the Finger Lakes. There's the Finger Lakes AVA, which can extend almost all the way from Rochester to Syracuse, and then you have Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake. And if we were in any other country in the world, or if we were in California or Oregon, it would be divided up into so many different AVAs. If you go from lake to lake, we have more soil types in this region than you can imagine. We have lakes in between each area. We have hills in between each lake. We have glaciation, which is giving you just every vineyard can have 7 or 8 soil types in it when you work with it. And the fact that we only have 3 AVAs, in my mind, is insane, to be honest, because it's the fruit you're gonna get from Skinny Atlas Lake on the east side is gonna be completely different from the fruit you're gonna be getting from Canandaigua Lake on the west side, and everything in between is gonna vary quite a bit. At Atwater, we're in this area called Banana Belt, and in that area, we're on the east side of Seneca Lake, and we actually have a 2-degree higher temperature than many of the other areas in the Finger Lakes as well. So I think it's something we don't discuss enough in the Finger Lakes.
Well, I think like a lot of folks who are just trying Finger Lakes wine, we probably don't have time to get into the whole thing, but like the glacial component of how those glaciers drag those different soil types across the surface.
Yeah.
And went through all these phases of melting and then running off. And it really created some unique characteristics in our region.
Well,
And,
just as a stark example of even the larger scale variation here is my vineyard sits at 900 to 1,200 feet above sea level, and you guys are sitting at 600 tops.
Exactly.
I mean, so even just elevation alone, let alone all the soils, and then the way the different lakes change how the cloud patterns come through, the rain falls, the snow falls, or sticks or doesn't stick, all those things.
It's the slope too. For me, that's a huge thing that we
unbelievable.
don't discuss on each lake.
Air
Like
drainage.
Cayuga Lake, for myself, I think Riesling is not planted enough there because of the degree of the slope on that lake. It can do so well, and the subsoils there's quite a bit of slate there, and there's limestone as well, and there's the depth of the lakes as well. We don't discuss this. It's quite vast, the whole region.
So for time reasons, I could talk about this stuff all night, so we'll wait and we'll go off camera and we'll talk about it. I want to thank our second group of panelists. You guys did a great job and brought us some great wines to try. And on behalf of the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance, we'd like to thank all of our media members for tasting the wine and for giving us some feedback for our winemakers and owners on the products that we sent to you. And thank you very much. We'll see you next time.